Hello, and welcome to Part 2 of GridSME's NERC 101 training, Functions, Roles, and Registration. My name is Mark Abuano, Director of Regulatory Compliance at GridSME, and we are glad that you're listening to our multi-part series on NERC regulation and compliance. In this Part 2, I will be providing a review of the key registered entity functions and then cover the basics of NERC registration. I will wrap up with discussing the importance of having a compliant NERC program on day one of your registration. Before that, just a quick recap of what we covered in Part 1 of our series. NERC has been given broad authority by FERC to support reliability of the bulk electric system, or BES, by developing and enforcing compliance with mandatory electric reliability standards. The bulk electric system includes specific thresholds to pull transmission and generation facilities into scope of the NERC standards. For generation facilities, this includes thresholds based on a facility's capacity and connection voltage. Finally, NERC's functional model is a framework to determine which entities must register with NERC and be compliant with the NERC standards. And on that point, this is the NERC functional model diagram that NERC created to identify each specific reliability function. As we covered in Part 1, if an entity performs a specific function, NERC's processes require that entity to register for the function and comply with all associated requirements. You'll see there are certain functions that support operations, namely the reliability coordinator, balancing authority, transmission operator, and generator operator. Other functions are performed by entities with responsibilities to support long-term resource planning, owning and maintaining transmission facilities, providing transmission service to customers, and owning and maintaining generation resources. There's a clear hierarchy of reliability functions that entities perform. We have a substantial number of generator owners and operators for all the various generation plants within scope of NERC. There are fewer entities that serve the functions of reliability coordinator and balancing authority, which have broader oversight and authority over their respective areas to maintain BES reliability. The reliability coordinator has the ultimate authority through its systems and tools to maintain grid reliability with its wide area view of the BES. For example, at the start of 2019, there is currently only one reliability coordinator over all of the Western interconnection of the United States. Balancing authorities balance the internal generation and load in their respective balancing authority area and manage interties with neighboring balancing authorities, all to maintain system frequency. Transmission operators' main responsibility is to maintain voltage stability on the BES for their portion of the transmission system they operate, and to mitigate the risk that any single failure results in a significant grid event. Generator operators operate or direct the operation of generation facilities from their control center in order to coordinate operations with the local TOP and BA. Finally, generator owners own the generation facilities, and with that comes the responsibility to maintain their interconnection facilities and perform maintenance and reporting functions. Let's focus on the generator owner, or GO, and the generator operator, or GOP. The same entity may serve both these functions depending on whether an owner self-operates, for example, or a GO may have contracted with a third-party operator. Generator owners and generator operators are required to perform different types of activities for a generation facility under the NERC standards. For generator owners, this includes performing interconnection studies, maintaining facility ratings and a vegetation management program, verifying modeling data, maintaining relays, and performing battery checks on defined intervals. For generator operators, this includes training of operating personnel to use three-part communication during emergencies, maintaining generator voltage schedules, maintaining communications capability with the TOP and BA, and supporting system restoration when called upon. And all registered entities will have requirements to implement cybersecurity controls for their respective facilities and cyber systems. Here's a typical solar arrangement. You will see that the solar PV equity owner will typically register as a generator owner for the facility. The control center operator will typically register as a designated generator operator. The site's O&M provider may be the same entity as the control center operator, or a different entity that is selected to provide those services. The O&M provider will typically support NERC compliance by performing activities like protection system maintenance, battery checks, and support during any misoperations or incidents. NERC maintains a compliance registry of all registered entities responsible for complying with applicable NERC reliability standards and requirements. Organizations are responsible to register to the extent they are owners, operators, and users of BES facilities and perform a function listed in the functional model. Compliance is required by the registered entity as of the effective date of inclusion in the compliance registry. One takeaway to remember is that the effective date of an entity's registration with NERC will determine when it must begin to be compliant with the applicable standards and requirements. So for generation facilities in particular, it is important to understand when they must register with NERC and their region. For new generation facilities whose individual rating exceeds 20 MVA, the registration date will typically align with the generator's initial synchronization to the grid. For new dispersed power producing resources like wind and solar, the generator owner and operator should factor the 75 MVA threshold into the project schedule. For example, based on whether the project is being developed in phases or when the facility has the capability to energize at greater than 75 MVA. If there is an existing generation facility for which the owner or operator is changing, the updates to the GO or GOP registration should align with the transfer of ownership or operation to a different entity. Compliance programs should be structured to ensure compliance as of the registration effective date. That means all compliance policies and procedures are approved and in place, all training has been performed as needed, and all engineering and other technical documentation during commissioning has been reviewed and analyzed. This is a screenshot from NERC's compliance registry. You will see here that the registry lists each registered entity, its region, its registration effective date, and each registered function the entity performs. The general rule is that once a registered entity is registered for a function, it is on the hook for all penalties and other sanctions if there is a violation of any associated requirements. Typically, a registered entity will assume full responsibility for compliance and penalties or sanctions for noncompliance. Registered entities may also delegate some of its responsibility or accountability for NERC compliance. For example, two registered entities may enter into a written agreement to allocate compliance responsibility for a particular function. This is called a coordinated functional registration. A registered entity can also delegate managing its compliance program to a third party, for example, a compliance consultant or contractor. However, while a registered entity may delegate performing a compliance task to a non-registered entity, it may not delegate responsibility for penalties at NERC to a non-registered entity. So let's close part 2 by going over what we covered today. First, NERC registered generator owners and generator operators have specific compliance requirements under the reliability standards. Compliance with the reliability standards is expected once an organization registers for their specific functions. And finally, a registered entity's responsibility and accountability for NERC compliance can be accomplished through different options. This will take us into part 3 of the series, where we'll cover the basics of NERC compliance. In the meantime, here's our contact information for you to reach out with any questions and feedback. Again, thank you for listening.